Hello, my name is Michelle Taylor. I am the founder and executive director of Sankofa Summer School. I am so happy that you have joined us this evening, and we are in for a treat. This is our sixth year running this program, and each of the classes have been selected to represent the diversity and the beauty of people of the African diaspora. I brought in some experts who are going to share everything that they know with you. We hope that you are engaged in this class, that you keep it interactive, have questions for our facilitator, and overall, I hope that you just really enjoy yourself and gain something, some new knowledge from this. We're so happy that you're here. At the end of the class, please consider filling out the feedback form. It helps us improve every single year. And without further ado, here's your class. How about now? Can you hear me now? Jesus, I cannot win. Can you all hear me now? Please let me know in the chat. Because why is my microphone not working? Okay. So here's the thing. I gotta tell you guys, I knew something was gonna happen. I've been doing this for several years now, and for some reason this year, every single class we've had has had some technical issues, but we're going along with it. So welcome to Sankofa Summer School. I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you for letting me know that I was muted because I damn sure would have kept talking. But what I was saying is that the reason why I'm kind of like laughing or whatever is because I was actually not supposed to teach this class. We had another person who unfortunately could no longer do the class, but because we knew that people registered and because I'm committed to providing the education that I have committed to, I said, I can do this class. And so I decided I designed a class for this, and I'm so glad that you all are here. So as we do with every Sankofa Summer School class, we open by explaining the Afrocentric approach. Sankofa Summer School is an Afrocentric school, and what we mean is this. Dr. Molefi K. Asante developed Afrocentricity as a theoretical framework in the 1980s. Since then, brilliant scholars have expanded the Afrocentric paradigm, giving us a template to guide our educational praxis. Simply, being Afrocentric means centering Africana people in their own narratives and making them the subjects, not the objects, of other people's stories. For most of us, our learning experiences have been primarily Eurocentric. We learned that European ways of knowing and being are the best and universally applicable. Afrocentricity challenges this notion of European and white supremacy and encourages us to center ourselves as Africana people first and foremost. Okay. So now that we've got that out of the way, I think that's actually going to be really important for this class today, because as I was thinking about what I wanted to teach related to this, as somebody who is a scholar who focuses on media and representation, I was like, all right, let's get a better understanding of what it means for Black people to tell their own stories, right? And John Henry Clark, spoke a lot about media. Stuart Hall spoke a lot about media. Malcolm X even talked about media. And when we think about the power that media has to shape narratives, we have to look at the history of Black journalism. We have to look at the Black journalists who have contributed to shaping that narrative. Now, normally when we're having a class, I'm usually behind the scenes running all the tech stuff. So tonight I will actually be doing both of them. So please, if you would be so kind as to be patient with me as I navigate through this by myself. All right, so today, what are we going to talk about? We're going to be looking at who has the power to decide what becomes news, how Black people are represented, and who gets remembered. We're going to talk about the birth of the Black press as a weapon against racial terror. We're going to talk about building a national Black public sphere. We're going to talk about Black journalism beyond newspapers. And we're going to talk about independent Black media in the digital age. And I'm also going to do a couple of profiles on some folks who I think are pretty important and that we should know about. All right. Okay. Here I go stage managing. All right. So I have notes. I actually wrote a script, guys. So, just bear with me on this. So for nearly 200 years, Black journalists have had to confront a basic problem. America has always produced stories about Black people, but those stories have very often been created by people who did not know us, did not understand us, and did not value us, or who were actively invested in maintaining ideas about Black inferiority. So tonight, the question running underneath all of this is, who gets to tell our story? And just as importantly, who gets to decide which of our stories matter? Journalism has enormous power because journalism is what shapes narratives and helps the public understand what happens in the world around them. Journalists make choices and decide what becomes headlines. They decide whose photographs appear, right? And I wanted to give a quick example, with the white male family annihilators, how they more often than not show photos of them happily with their families as if they didn't just kill everyone in the family, right? Journalists decide who get interviewed. They decide whose account is considered credible. One of the examples I'm also thinking about is how journalists get to decide whether to call something a riot, a rebellion, a massacre, an uprising, or a protest, right? And this is a common thread throughout the history of Black journalism. And journalism about Black people, right? News coverage about Black people. Those choices shape public memory, and historically, Black people have rarely controlled the institutions that make those decisions, right? So that means the history of Black journalism is also a history of Black people affirming that we are more than capable of interpreting our own experiences. I think a lot about representation as someone whose research is in media and representations of Black people. There's an important distinction that we should make. Representation usually asks, are Black people present and visible? Journalism asks, do Black people have the institutional power to determine how Black life is documented and understood? Okay, here we go. All right, so you see I have an image here from Black Press Day, March 16th, 1827. This is a Freedom Journal, right? So this is where our story really begins, right? I want to make it clear that I cannot survey every single moment in the history of Black journalism, okay? I'm going to do my best to kind of give you a story arc so you can, kind of get a general sense of things. So on March 16th, 1827, Samuel Cornish and John B. Russwurm published the first issue of Freedom's Journal in New York City. And they explained to us exactly why they did it. We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us, right? And so this is really important because in 1827, in many states in the United States, it is still illegal for Black people to read, to be taught to read, to learn to read, to write, anything like that. So if Black people were caught reading, right, that they could die for that, right? And if people were caught teaching Black people how to read, they could get into a lot of trouble. So the fact that in 1827, these two men were able to publish, right, the Freedom Journal, like we can't sleep on how important that was, right? And so I want us to kind of sit with this, right? Because nearly 200 years later, what they're talking about still explains why independent Black media matters, right? They said, we wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us, right? So white newspapers regularly caricatured Black people, defended slavery, questioned Black intelligence, questioned Black citizenship, and otherwise ignored Black communities altogether. All of the things that we were accomplishing and doing, they just decided not to write about it, right? So in starting this newspaper, Cornish and Russwurm were challenging the idea that white America possessed any authority to define Black people, right? So the Freedom's Journal, it covered abolition, education, politics, international affairs. They were talking about Haiti, Okay? They were talking about Africa. They were talking about Black achievement, marriages, deaths, employment, all aspects of community life, right? I think that's pretty awesome, right? Like you said, so much power, right? Like the white people had power, but listen, when they publish this, this becomes very powerful for them, okay? So I want us to look at a couple of women who I think are super important, and we can't talk about Black journalism without talking about these ladies. All right. So first we have Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. She is considered the mother of African American journalism. Love talking about her. She was born in 1825. She occupies an essential place in the history of African American journalists. She was a poet, a novelist, an abolitionist, a lecturer, and an activist, right? She was also a part of the 19th century Black press tradition that established journalism as a tool for political education, racial advocacy, and community building. Long before, decades before, Black women were widely recognized as professional journalists, she used newspapers and periodicals to speak directly to African American audiences about slavery, citizenship, racial violence, women's rights, education, temperance, and the responsibilities of freedom. And I think what makes her really important, like so many other Black women like her at this time, is that they always incorporated gender. And though they may not have been covered as much, the only person I could think who does not get as much discussion about her gender lens is Ida B. Wells, and we're going to talk about her in a second. But when I look at people like her, I look at people like Sojourner Truth, I look at, some others, Maria Stewart, I'm looking at people who were talking about women's rights too, right? And that was risky at that time because a lot of Black men, unfortunately, were pretty sexist. They learned it from, But anyway, as an abolitionist, she became part of this Black press, and the Black press became an extension of her work, right? So and we think about this in modern times as well. And when we get to talking about the digital age, I'll elaborate on that more. But this intersection of activism and journalism, where journalism becomes this kind of weapon against this racial terror, right? And that written word is so powerful. It lives on. One of my favorite things to do, particularly when I'm preparing classes, is really going through these primary sources, these early newspaper articles that our people have written. And it's just, the activism is there. There was very little objectivity in what they were writing about. And that ties into Afrocentricity. Afrocentricity is like, no, we can't be objective. Folks, we absolutely cannot be objective. We have to insert ourselves into these stories, right? So she contributed poetry, essays, letters, and political commentary to African American and abolitionist publications, including the works of Frederick Douglass, the Anti-Slavery Bugle, all those kinds of things. She wrote as an African American woman at a time when American journalism and political life were overwhelmingly controlled by men. And she refused to separate racial liberation from the experiences of African American women, right? So in doing so, she establishes this tradition that later African American women journalists and editors would expand upon, okay? All right. So this is about Ethel Payne, and I got this information. It was a really great profile done on her for the National Women's History Museum, and it was written by Ashley Anderson in 2018. So I want to give her credit because I am using her description to talk about Sister Payne. So she's known as the first lady of the Black press because of her fearlessness and journalist as a civil rights activist, right? So she's coming almost 100 years later after Frances E.W. Harper, right? So in 1948, she left Chicago, right? So we remember the Great Migration. A lot of people left the South and went to Chicago. She ends up leaving Chicago to go work in Japan for the Army Special Services Club. When the Korean War began in 1950, she wrote in her journal about the treatment of African American troops. Although President Truman had ordered the military to be integrated, McCarthy refused to desegregate the troops. So Ethel Payne ends up writing about segregation of shoulders. She's documenting the racial slurs that are being used against them, about all the babies that were abandoned as orphans because they were born to Japanese mothers and Black fathers. And this is something that also happens in Germany during World War II. One day I'm going to do something about that too. But because she was writing in her diary, she showed this to a war reporter, Alex Wilson, and he decided to send her notes to the Chicago Defender. Okay, and we're going to talk about the Chicago Defender in a bit. So her articles, though, about the Korean War, what was going on, gave a big boost to the newspaper circulation, right? And then, unfortunately, she was critiqued because they said she was upsetting the morale of the truth, but she was being honest and straightforward. We know with journalism, you have to tell the truth, right? And it's not going to please everyone, right? So she ends up getting a full-time position, and she began writing for the Chicago Defender in 1951, right? All right. So remember I mentioned Ida B. Wells. And so I think one of the clearest examples of journalism as resistance is Ida B. Wells. And when we think about the work that Wells was doing, she was not just doing op-eds or things like that. She was actually reporting and doing investigative journalism about lynching. So basically, after 3 of her friends were lynched, she began investigating the circumstances surrounding lynchings. And I think about that now because there's a lot of conversation right now about Black people who have recently been found hanging from trees, and the whole conversation of whether or not Black people hang themselves or lynching and things like that. So we can actually go back and look at, Ida B. Wells and her documentation of these things and see how it was treated by white newspapers, right? Because back then, white newspapers commonly justified lynching by repeating these claims that Black men had sexually assaulted white women. But when she examined the evidence, by looking at the newspaper reports, she was like, no, she's investigating the relationships. She examines the economic and political circumstances and all these things. And she's like, no, the lynching is not just about protecting white women. That's the image that you're putting forth, but here's the reality. And so her reporting documented issues of racial control, political control, economic control, right? Her reporting on lynching became so threatening that a white mob destroyed the office of the Memphis Free Speech while she was away from the city, right? They destroyed the printing press because they were so troubled and threatened by what she was writing about, right? And so when we think about Ida, we think about how if your reporting threatens someone's ability to control the narrative, suddenly, for the mainstream, Black journalism becomes dangerous. And there are several parts throughout our history in which we see evidence of Black journalism being considered dangerous, right? So as we're moving along through the early 20th century, we start seeing more and more publications popping up around the country, Black printing presses, Black newspapers, journals, all kinds of things are popping up. Because also, during Reconstruction, hundreds of thousands of Black people learned to read. And this is before television. This is before movies were really all, spreading as popular as they were. People were reading, right? And so by the early 20th century, the Black press had become an extraordinary national institution. We have papers like the Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Baltimore Afro-American. And I'm pointing out the Afro-American point because a lot of people say, we weren't no African-Americans, we weren't no Afro-Americans. Yes, we were, okay? The New York Amsterdam News and the Philadelphia Tribune, right? Tribune is still in business. Okay, if I'm not mistaken, I think the Philadelphia Tribune is the oldest Black publication that has published uninterrupted in this country. I could be wrong, but I believe that is their claim to fame, okay? So what these newspapers were able to do was connect Black communities across the country, across geography. This is especially important when we're talking about migration and families leaving the South and going to the North and the Midwest, and how they're able to keep abreast of things that are happening in the South and in their homes where they left. But also they're able to see what's going on in these other cities and what's happening. And so one of my favorite examples is the Chicago Defender and the Great Migration. The Defender openly encouraged migration and provided a rallying call for Southerners to come to the North, okay? It was publishing information about jobs and housing. It was describing opportunities in northern cities. So this ended up getting a lot of Black people to feel inspired to move to the North. And I'm going to have this really quick clip. I'm not going to show the whole thing, just a little bit to give you a little something. Please let me know that you can hear it in the comments.
The Defender was unique for decades, really, in exposing the horrors of Jim Crow segregation in the South.
Launched in 1905 by Robert S. Abbott, the Chicago Defender started first as a weekly newspaper. Pullman Porters distributed it. That gave the paper the same reach as the railways, making its way deep into the segregated South.
Once the Defender was inserted into the mail stream, it was not removed. This is a very strange feature of Southern segregationists that for whatever reason, with all the atrocities they were willing to commit, they were not really willing to interfere with the U.S. mail. Perhaps because there were federal penalties for that from a very early time in our history, but the Defender was mailed freely throughout the South, even as Southern authorities spoke out against the newspaper.
The Chicago Defender becomes really important as a kind of source of information about the economic opportunities for African Americans in the South, especially in the kind of shadow of World War I, where European migration gets effectively shut off. And so there's this kind of there are all these new opportunities for African Americans.
Okay, I'm gonna pause it there. Just wanted to just give you a little taste of what have you. But really what I want you to understand is that the Defender provided African Americans with news reported from their own perspective. They covered racial violence, lynching, segregation, politics, labor culture, and everyday Black life, while openly and unapologetically advocating for racial advancement. And its influence extended far beyond Chicago. As I said, they were encouraging Southern Black families to leave Jim Crow behind and seek new opportunities, okay? Besides the mail, which I thought was really interesting that they could actually mail it and have it not be interfered with, they also gave it to the Black Pullman porters because they were also traveling across the country. So they would give copies of the newspaper, and the Pullman porters would hand them out at the stops that they were going, right? So it almost becomes another type of Underground Railroad in a sense of making sure that information is disseminated and spread evenly and fairly throughout the country, right? They demonstrated that Black-owned media could accomplish what Black-owned media could accomplish when it spoke directly to Black audience. It helped create a national public sphere. It connected geographically separated communities and challenged racist narratives in mainstream media, okay? All right. So the Black press becomes super, super important during the Black Power movement and for the freedom struggle, okay? So this idea that journalism and our media could be used, especially print media, could be used in this activist way, continues through World War II, the Korean War, the long civil rights movement, and we historians often refer to the long civil rights movement because we don't mark the beginning of the civil rights movement with the murder of Emmett Till, as some others might. We go back to the Double V campaign, and I would even argue even before that. But the Double V campaign, right? Let's talk about that. During World War II, the Pittsburgh Courier launched the Double V campaign, right? And so the argument was that if African Americans are going to be asked to fight fascism and racism overseas, what about racism at home? So the double V slogan stood for victory abroad and victory at home. And this was an incredibly important intervention because it exposed the contradiction at the center of American democracy, right? I teach this with my students all the time because it's like what was happening for Black soldiers, and this actually began in World War I, is that they were being influenced by the Bolshevik Revolution, by talks of liberation and freedom in Europe, and for the folks who were fighting for it there, and they were exposed to that, and they were bringing it home, and they were facing a lot of pushback when they got home, aside from the fact that they were not being treated as equal human beings, right? And facing racism and discrimination. They were actually, like, our Black soldiers back then were actually some of the leading voices in a lot of this early revolutionary talk. And if you dig into the history of some of the more radical freedom fighters, you'll see military history there, right? Or they're raised by people, by men who served in this kind of radical tradition, right? But we also think about the murder of Emmett Till, and I'm not ever going to dismiss the importance of that, right? One of the caveats that I always add is that when we talk about Emmett Till, we need to talk about Recy Taylor, but that's not the point of this class today. But when we think about the murder of Emmett Till, Black publications, particularly Jet Magazine, okay? Put a 1 in the chat if you grew up with Jet Magazine in your house, because I sure did, and I actually collect them now, so I have like a whole collection of Jet magazines. They played an enormous role in making Americans confront what had happened to him, okay? Now, I'm just going to warn you, I am going to show an image that does show Emmett Till in the next slide as I'm reading. So if you want to turn away, you don't want to look at it, I'm just going to give you that warning, but I'm just going to read a little bit more and then we'll show it rather briefly. Mamie Till Mobley understood the importance of the visibility. She wanted people to see what the fabrication of white supremacy had done to her child. The Black press was instrumental in carrying that story across the country. Throughout the civil rights and Black power eras, Black journalists documented organizing, demonstrations, police violence, political debates, and community activism. So the reason why I'm showing this, and I don't move away from showing this like some people do, is because this is what she wanted, right? This was the whole point of having Black publications cover the funeral of Emmett Till. It was to show what they had done. And in this way, we can honor what Mamie Till wanted. And sometimes I think when we shy away from it, like we're going against what she wanted. But I will quickly move along, okay? And again, I'm not laughing because I take this any less seriously, but I am that kind of educator, and I am going to show these kinds of things. So hopefully that wasn't too bad for you. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about people who broke the color line, right? The first African-American reporter at the New York Times was a man named George Streeter, who joined the newspaper in 1945. He had already built a significant career in Black press before entering the overwhelmingly white world of the Times. He was a graduate of Fisk University. He worked at several publications, including the Chicago Defender and the Pittsburgh Courier. It confirms that when we look at the coverage, it definitely confirms that he was hired in 1945. He was 43 years old. He was hired for general reporting. And so his hiring represented an important bridge between the established Black press and the gradual integration of major white-owned newsrooms. And I think George Streeter he remains important, not just because he's the first Black person to write for the New York Times, but because he comes from the legacy of Black press and he brought that into his journalism. Sometimes people incorrectly identify Thomas A. Johnson as the first Black reporter, but he's not. He did end up working for them, though. But I want to talk about him because he was the first Black reporter at Newsday, and later he worked at the New York Times. He was one of the first Black journalists to work as a foreign correspondent for a major daily newspaper, so he deserves his kudos as well. This came from his obituary in the New York Times. Black reporters and editors were rarities in newsrooms of large American newspapers in the years in which Mr. Johnson's career gained prominence. From the civil rights protests and urban unrest of the 1960s through the rise of the Black Power movement and beyond, Mr. Johnson often found himself as both a reporter and an interpreter of racial conflict and change. He was also a founding member of Black Perspective, an early organization of Black reporters in New York, and a member of Black Enterprise Magazine's founding board of advisors, right? So he's not just a beat writer. He's not, just working just only for them. He's creating organizational, power by bringing Black reporters together, and he's helping to found what goes on to be Black Enterprise. Black Enterprise used to be a really good financial magazine for the upwardly mobile Black people. I don't know, everything is AI right now and it's kind of trash. But at one point they were reputable, right? So then I want to highlight Bernadette Carey Smith. She was a pioneering journalist. She also broke racial and gender barriers, okay? So she joined the New York Times in 1965, where she was one of the newspaper's earliest Black journalists, and it's believed that she was the first Black woman reporter. She initially covered fashion, society, and women in the arts, which reflected the limited assignments given to women journalists at the time. But I'm just going to put a pin in that because I'm going to come back and talk about why this is important, right? In 1967, she moved to the Washington Post, and the Washington Post actually gave her more opportunities to cover more national stories. She covered the Poor People's Campaign. She covered other major events with the Civil Rights Movement. She later worked with Vogue, ABC News, and Johnson Publishing, and she played an early editorial role in the development of Essence magazine. So we love her. We want to give her some love, and we want to shout out to her, okay? All right. So I just wanted us to kind of look at some of the publications and how the Black press was involved with the freedom struggle. We have coverage of the Black Panthers and their breakfast programs. The Black Panthers ran their own publication. They had their own newsletter, right? So you see the Pig's feeble attempt to sabotage the breakfast program. They were reporting on their own news, the stuff that was happening in their communities from their perspective. We saw publications of, advertisements for the Montgomery bus boycott. They were able to distribute that and get that information out. We have something from the National Black Feminist Organization advertising their Eastern Regional Conference. We see an advertisement for Shirley Chisholm when she ran for president. Bring us together, or the U.S. together, vote Chisholm, unbought and unbossed. Excuse me. And this goes on to be, her most popular slogan. So Black press definitely plays a role in making sure that this information is getting out to the people. Okay. Now we get to talk about some of my favorite publications, right? The Black lifestyle press, listen, we're not going to shade them because they were so important. Again, how many of you grew up with Essence and Ebony alongside Jet Magazine in your house? Right? These were staples in my house. And I'm very happy to say I've gone on to write for both Ebony and Essence, having my own column in both of those magazines. But let's talk about their history a little bit. So Ebony was founded in 1945. John H. Johnson created this national magazine that centered on African American life, achievement, culture, politics, entertainment, and style. It was one of the interesting things a lot of people don't know is that Johnson was modeling Essence magazine after Life magazine. I also collect Life magazines as well, and we used to get them too. I don't know if y'all remember how much bigger they were than every other magazine on the newsstand, and still are. Are they even still published? I think the last one I saw was still super big, but he was modeling after that visually, right? And he just wanted to make sure that Black people would be centered in the story. Again, an Afrocentric approach, right? Not a footnote, not an exception, right? So Ebony helped document the emergence and aspirations of 20th century Black middle class while also covering major political and civil rights issues. It's important to point that out because both Essence and Ebony, a little on the bougie side, right? For a while they were, until the digital age. But they were kind of, I mean, you could open up a Essence magazine and see them advertising, coats that were $30,000, right? And my poor self coming from the hood, I was like, I can't afford no $30,000 coat, but there was going to be sisters that would be buying $30,000 coats, right? So Essence and Ebony were making sure that they covered this, right? Jet comes along in 1951. It was designed to be a smaller, fast-paced weekly news magazine, very similar to them. And if you ever read them, sometimes you would see a snippet in Jet, and it might be elaborated in Ebony, right? So that kind of thing. You had the Jet Beauty of the Week. You would have the Jet songs, the top R&B songs on the charts, and all those kinds of things. Just kind of that weekly magazine about the everyday lives and lifestyles of Black people. Let's see. Essence was founded in 1907 by Edward Lewis, Clarence Smith, Cecil Hollingsworth, and Jonathan Blount. I just want to point out that these are all 4 men who established this magazine that primarily was seeking to serve African American women. But it was important because they recognized that there was a gap. There was this Black women specifically were being neglected as target audiences for the Black press and magazines. So this magazine focused a lot on beauty and fashion, relationships, careers. It did include culture. It did include politics. A lot of social issues centering Black women's experiences. It was in this magazine that the first Black lesbian published about being lesbian, right? And that was Shirlane McCrae, who later goes on to marry Bill de Blasio, who was the mayor of New York. She was also a member of the Combahee River Collective, right? So, sexuality is fluid. We love it. But Essence over time became one of the country's most influential institutions of Black women's media. So that's also really important, okay? So I just want to move on to how we were more than newspapers. And I just want to play a couple of clips for you that I think are really interesting. And so what these clips are going to show is how Black men were able to get into television media, because television changes the entire landscape of media. If you haven't studied anything like this or taken these classes, you may not fully understand what the creation of the television and the fact that it ended up being in everyone's house, what this changed for American culture and culture around the world, right? So Black men were more easily able to enter into this space, but they used their access in really important ways. So I'm just going to show you a couple of clips, and just because I'm a signifying monkey, so okay.
And explore possible solutions to the Black artist dilemma with 3 major Black stars. Superstar Sammy Davis Jr., who at 6 years of age made his film debut in a race movie.
In my opinion, it's just a whole conspiracy. When you've got people like Billy D. Williams, Cecily Tyson, and 100 other Black actors and actresses who are more than capable, and they find no roles for them.
Tony Award winner Ben Vereen.
We're once again quick to write in about the things we dislike instead of writing in and being positive behind those brothers who are out there and sisters who are out there working as hard as they can.
Oscar-nominated ragtime star Howard Rollins.
How does Howard Rollins survive? I mean, is it just your press that I perceive in which you are going from one good role to another? Are there those periods in between these good roles that I don't know about?
Yes.
Yes, to the latter, huh?
Yes, yes.
So one of the reasons I wanted to show that was this is Tony Brown's journal. Tony Brown was the man, 50 grand. Okay. This man had such an eclectic show. And he was working with 13, which, you know, PBS for a lot of us, but it was Channel 13 in New York. And I think he might have been the first Black person to get his own show there, or one of the first Black people to get his own show. But this man would cover controversial topics. And so in this clip, he's interviewing different Black actors about their experiences in Hollywood, right? And it's interesting that he gets to Howard Rollins, who was very successful, but also very gay. And they didn't know this at the time, but I always bring up the queerness of people because I think that representation for LGBTQ people is very important, right? All right, so we're gonna watch this next clip. I'm gonna warn you, this next clip has Louis Farrakhan in it. I know a lot of people don't like Louis Farrakhan, but this is a really interesting clip. And I'm showing it because we move on to someone else, Tavis Smiley. Tavis Smiley becomes, honestly, one of the most important journalists and reporters that we have on television, right? And we're talking in the 80s and the 90s, okay? Like, Tavis Smiley got his issues, but let's not sleep on what he does. But in this clip, he's leading a discussion between African-American scholars, opinion makers, analysts, and other elected officials in this gathering in Chicago for a special presentation of We Count, the Black Agenda is the American Agenda, right? So he's able to gather all of these people together to have this conversation, and it's broadcast. And this is not something that we were really seeing at the time. So I'm just going to show you a little clip of this, okay?
That's right.
So you see Cornel West there,
Obama
Jesse Jackson,
does not run this country.
Louis Farrakhan.
President Obama has been chosen to govern white affairs.
Oh.
And if in that process we get something, it won't be because the governing powers want it. It will be because we organized and forced a government to speak to our needs. Now,
Michael Eric Dyson is there, alleged sexual predator that he is. I'm sorry, I gotta say it. You guys know I'm gonna keep it real. My instructors don't necessarily go there, but I can because it's my school. But right now he's under investigation for several accusations of sexual harassment and assault. Anyway, but as you see at the time, there were so many people at that table, right? So to have a gathering like that and have them have this discussion on the Black agenda was super important in terms of journalism. Now I'm just going to show you, I'm going to warn you. Because again, this stuff is funny to me. We're going to talk about R. Kelly and the coverage of R. Kelly. I think it's a really interesting thing to look at how coverage about him, changed over time. So here he is with Ed Gordon. Ed Gordon, another major Black male journalist who he was on BET Nightly News. He was, when BET used to have a news program, I mean, he was vital for everything. So let's watch this clip real quick.
Do you believe that it would be easier, notwithstanding any legal question, do you believe it would be easier to sit down, view the tape, and I know what you said about not doing it, but view the tape and say, to rest everybody's mind that, yes, I've seen the tape and I'm telling you what I told you because I knew I didn't do it. I
don't think that would rest anybody's mind that is intelligent, because if someone out there feels that I have to go look at a tape that I already know I didn't make, I don't think that rests their mind. It wouldn't rest my mind if someone said that.
Do you understand the skepticism though? Let's take you out of it. Let's say it was me going through this and you looked at the videotape and it looked just like me.
You understand
where I'm going?
Yeah, I understand. Though. But if it
so hold this clip because that pause from Ed Gordon was like, there's something there. Like, are you serious? It's like, and so this becomes a thing with Black journalists interviewing R. Kelly, trying to be as objective as possible, trying to give this man a chance. And he just says things that they're like, what? And of course, you know, this is the famous one with Torre, who's still out there doing his thing, but this is really what catapulted him into fame.
You know, wondering about you. Do you like teenage girls?
When you say teenage, how are we talking?
Look
Girls
at his face.
who are teenagers.
19?
19 and younger.
I have some 19-year-old friends, but I don't like anybody illegal, if that's what we're talking about, underage.
Some people think that you like underage girls. What do you say to them?
Well, those people that don't know Robert, they don't know me, you know, so I usually don't get into what people think about me, you know, because all my...
Sorry. Did y'all see Torre's face? Like, now, mind you, by this point, everybody had seen the tape, right? The tape in the previous clip R. Kelly was saying didn't exist, right? So Torre is here asking him straight up, because everybody wants to get a piece of him. Everybody wants to interview him. And he was not smart enough to not do these interviews, because if we recall, you know, R. Kelly is functionally illiterate, and he's in front of these investigative journalists who are asking these hard-hitting questions, and he has no media training and preparation, and he can't even... Anyway, we got one more. Okay. And again, when I'm laughing, it's not at the, you know, doubting the severity of what's going on. You guys know I've actively been involved in the investigations of R. Kelly, but I just think it's really interesting how the coverage has shifted over time. Now we're going to go to the infamous one with Gayle King.
Absolutely.
You feel that people have maligned your character?
I have been assassinated. I have been buried alive, but I'm alive.
So I think the point you're making is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you have never held anybody against their will.
I don't need to. Why would I?
Well,
how stupid would
never
it be
held
for
anybody...
R. Kelly, with all I've been through in my way, way past, to hold somebody, let alone 4, 5, 6, 50, you said. Why, how stupid would I be to do that?
I didn't say you were holding...
That's stupid, guys.
I didn't...
Is this camera on me?
Yes. It's on.
That's stupid. Use your common sense. Don't forget the blogs. Forget how you feel about me. Hate me if you want to, love me if you want, but just use your common sense. How stupid would it be for me to, with my crazy past and what I've been through, oh, right now, I just think I need to be a monster and hold girls against their will, chain them up in my basement, and don't let them eat and don't let them out unless they need some shit.
Mind you, he's telling us what he's doing, right? And where Gayle King shines here, I do too. He's totally confused. Where she shines here is notice that she maintains a very steady composure. She lets him talk. And I think there's this dynamic that Gayle is navigating as a woman, because you see, I mean, by this point in his life and career and things like that, he has really gone over the edge. And so he's a lot more heightened or whatever, but see how he's talking to her versus how he talked to the men in the past, right? Very man to man, very level, but with her, he's talking over her, he's yelling, he's getting all excited, and these kinds of things, right? But then what happens?
Jews down the street from their uncle.
Robert,
stop it. Y'all quit playing. Quit playing.
Look at her face.
I didn't do this stuff. This is not me. Y'all, I'm fighting for my life. Y'all killing me with this. I gave y'all 30 years of my career.
Robert.
30 years of my career.
She's still very calm.
Y'all trying to kill me.
Yeah.
You're killing me, man.
Yeah.
This is not about music. I'm trying to have a relationship with my kids, and I can't do it.
Gayle is like, okay. But let's get back to the questioning, right? But he does not do this. We don't see him doing this with other journalists that are, asking him these kinds of questions. So, there's that. So we then get into the digital age, right? And I'm kind of thinking about, how this kind of all goes back to what we were talking about. Who gets to tell the stories? Who gets to control the narrative, right? And it's interesting because I had a slide with all the things that I've written about or whatever, and I was just like, I don't need to show that. But I wanted to just kind of, talk to you all for a second about that. Let me see. There we go. So I wanted to kind of use myself in this conversation of like how the digital age has really changed how we do journalism and reporting and things like this. I'm not somebody who set out to be a journalist. I wanted to be a writer for sure. I wanted to be an author. I wanted to be an essayist. I wanted to be someone who could write commentary on culture and politics and all those things. But growing up, I didn't see that as something that I would be able to do. I didn't go to school to study journalism because I just was like, this is not what something I'm going to do. But what ended up happening with the advent of social media is that we now had these new platforms to just talk into the public, right? Strangers, people we've never met. There's people I have known online for well over a decade, nearly 2 decades, that I have never once met. But we have known each other and have interacted with each other all those times, right? So social media ends up creating this new landscape for people to share their stories, to report on stories, to cover stories, and things like that. And it goes from, the trained Black journalists fighting to make headway in different publications and in different spaces, and broadcast journalism, radio, all those kinds of things. And I recognize that I did not talk much about radio because that's just, okay, for time. But radio has also been a really important space for Black people to, as part of our press, right? Telling our stories and things like that. Also highlighting our artists and musicians and things like that. But social media comes along and changes everything, right? So anyone could, get in front of a camera and start talking to it and tell stories about their own lives or tell stories about things that they were seeing, right? Kind of the citizen journalism kind of thing. And this ends up helping the activism of the modern time, right? Black Lives Matter, 5 years later, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, all those things like that. All of these kinds of uprisings and protests against police brutality, the story is being told differently in ways that it's never been told before, because you have so many people now have these smartphones with their own cameras, they have microphones, and they are creating primary sources, right? Everywhere you go now, people have their phones out. They're recording, they're catching these things. Nearly every day we log on and we see videos of police brutality, police doing all these kinds of things. It's not that they're doing it more than they used to be. It's just that we had no way to capture it. And if we did capture it, we often felt like either it wasn't going to get published or it was not going to get the attention or have any real effect, right? Go back to, I'm old enough to remember Rodney King. I'm old enough to remember us all tuning in to the news, watching a man get beaten within an inch of his life, and then seeing those officers go on trial and be acquitted, right? So it starts to make us wonder, what are we doing? But with social media, we are able then to report these things. And so folks like me, people who are actually talented writers, people who are effective and engaging public speakers, found ways to communicate with audiences and share our thoughts about things, report on things, all those, those wonderful things. And I started getting asked to write things based on my Twitter posts, based on things that I was putting in Facebook. Next thing I know, oh, thank you so much. Yes, it does highlight that. That was the point of me writing the book, right? So I'm giving you a synopsis of the book. So I wrote this book, Reclaiming Our Space. And in it, I literally am documenting how this whole thing happened because I was actively a part of it, right? So next thing I know, I'm being asked to write a post for the New York Times on online harassment and how we've been dealing with this for so long. Me, poor Black girl from the Bronx who didn't study journalism a day in her life, is now writing for the New York Times. Then I get to write for Time magazine an article on Black women's experiences with domestic violence, which remains one of the most highly cited pieces in a trade publication like ever. Me, and I was like, all I was doing was just living my Black feminist life and telling these stories because I thought it was really important, right? And there hasn't been one since, by the way. I'm writing for the Washington Post, right? Sharing my argument that Harriet Tubman should not be on a $20 bill, right? And I'm making a historian kind of, argument that we should not be putting currency on currency, right? There's all these spaces. I cover R. Kelly. I cover R. Kelly for Out magazine, which is a queer magazine. I covered it for Vox. Like, I'm able to tap in to these ongoing conversations and investigations and contribute something unique and something specifically from my positionality as a Black feminist woman in the 21st century. And so I'm just using myself as an example because so many people have been able to do that. When we look at when Ebony went digital, right, we look at people like Kierna Mayo, who had long been in journalism spaces, right? And we look at Jamila Lemieux, and they come in and they're editors, they're giving opportunities for more unique Black voices to be heard. We're starting to see a shift also from the older folks to the younger folks, right? This is very important because younger voices were often shut out from traditional media because people didn't trust that they knew what they were talking about. But yet we're seeing more of that, right? Now, the downside of that is that some of the principles of journalism and investigative reporting and things like that have been lost along the way by hiring people who have no real training. But there are still people who know what they're doing that are out there. I think about Monique Judge, who is over at News One. I think she's like the managing editor over there, holding that newspaper together, right? We had publications like The Griot or The Root or things like that, publications that were coming up and giving opportunities to still tell Black stories. Now we're facing this whole AI crisis. We're facing ways that, a lot of Black media publications are succumbing to it. But social media platforms give people the space to create these kinds of digital publications. And it's easier now more than it ever has been. So that, I think, is actually a really positive thing. I'm thinking about the revival of Fire magazine, which I'm doing with Blair Imani. This publication is 100 years old, but now we're given the opportunity for up and coming younger African-American writers, artists, things like that to come and be published in this magazine to honor that one, right? So these are the kinds of things that can happen now because we're in this digital age. And so I think a lot about the future, right? The questions that we need to be thinking about still: who is speaking for us? Who owns the platform, right? Big controversy. I don't know why it was a controversy, but a big controversy is that I deleted all of my social media. I deleted all of my social media because I was tired of contributing my labor, my emotional and intellectual labor, to platforms that were not paying me, that are run by white supremacists, that control our content, manipulate our content, exploit us for our content. And I said, I don't want to do this anymore while still being subjected to some of the most ridiculous ideas ever. And so I challenge folks who care about preserving Black narratives to think about what you're contributing. Who is controlling these things? Every time you go to type a post and you send it out there, who owns that? Who owns your words? And now when we hear things about how, Meta is saying that they can now take your content and make AI images out of it and use it for whatever, we don't own these things. And so that's something that I am very much concerned about going forward as somebody who does work as a historian, as somebody who teaches this kind of stuff, right? Somebody who created a school like this to educate. I'm thinking about what happens when Black people do not get to control our stories, right? So that's kind of what I'm just thinking about, you know. So if you liked this, I do have, you know, you can make a donation. If you already donated to the class, thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take your questions right now. I try to be thorough in my presentations, but if you enjoyed this and you wanted to make an extra donation, remember, our program is primarily run through donations. We changed to a pay what you can model a couple of years ago because we wanted to make it more accessible to people who, you know, maybe didn't have the $25 for the class. And so we created a pay what you can model. And I think this year, I think about 80% of the people did not pay for the classes. But again, I'm not stating that as a complaint. I'm stating that as just a matter of fact. So if you want to support the school, if you want to support us being able to compensate our instructors, if you want to donate to continue supporting, you know, us going forward, covering technology costs and all those kinds of things, we really appreciate those of you that do. And just finally, before I close this out, this is the last class of the 2026 cohort of Sankofa Summer School. This year we had a lot, like I said, we had a lot of technical issues. I don't know why. We have never had that many issues with using this particular platform before. Somebody said it's because Mercury was retrograde most of the time. I don't know, but we really appreciate people sticking with us and sticking through it. We hope that everybody is watching the rewatches. I have them unlisted right now. Next week, everything will be available. So if you missed any of the classes, they will be available on our YouTube at Sankofa Summer School. I'm going to categorize it. There'll be a playlist for 2026, and you can go and watch whatever you missed this year. So I just really want to thank everybody who has supported us throughout the years. Even if you're new for the first year, I hope that you enjoyed the sessions that you got. And we're just going to continue to expand and to grow. I've been sitting back and making notes of things that we could do better, things that went really well, so I really love this. This is a labor of love. I do not get any money at all for this. All the money that comes in goes directly to my instructors and to covering the cost of maintaining the website, like I said, the technology and things like this. I'm very passionate about education for liberation. I'm very passionate about Afrocentric education. And so this is my labor of love and my gift to my community. So I appreciate you all for joining. And if there are no questions, I will say goodbye. And I hope to see you all next year. I'm going to send out a wrap-up email to everybody who registered for these classes, so you will get links to be able to view. But again, as I said, you can just go to Sankofa Summer School on YouTube, and all the classes will be available tomorrow. All right, take care, everybody. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.